Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a very exciting episode of the CA Esports podcast that we do here. I know it's been a while,
Little
with the
while.
whole quarantine situation and whatnot. We've just been getting the equipment back together, and with us today is a very special guest. So, for those of you who don't know, we're with Dominique. And Dominique, maybe you can just give yourself a quick little introduction and tell everyone, who you are and what you do, in case they don't already know, which they should.
Sure. So my name is Dominique Gelineau, otherwise known as Wisdom on Twitter and all of the social platforms. I am the general manager for the Toronto Ultra. We are the Canadian franchise in the Call of Duty League in our first season. And I oversee all of the day-to-day operations of the team. I also work with our leadership team on strategy, finance and budgeting. I also work with the league on any relationships with them, and then also, making sure that we're representing the team wherever we can with the community. So, just like having chats with you guys and trying to continue to show the world how awesome Call of Duty is.
Yeah.
That's pretty sweet. It sounds like you have your hand in a lot of different pots.
Yeah.
So what have you done up to this point to kind of develop the skill set needed to handle such an important position like this?
So I spent the last few years working in HR and recruitment. I actually worked at Activision for a couple of years. I
Wow.
worked at other video game studios. I worked at Fortune 500 companies, and really just trying to build some really core business skills and experience. I think it is important to have non-esports experience and then also understand how you can translate those back into esports, because there's kind of two schools of thought in esports, right? Either you hire someone who is endemic to the community because someone outside the community won't understand some of our specific nuances, or the other perspective is you hire someone from outside the community in esports because you want to do something different.
Yeah.
And I think at some point everyone is new to esports, and at some point everyone is not new to esports.
Yeah.
So really still seeing esports as an industry and a career, just like you would if you were going to go work in tech for Google or for Facebook, or even like at your local grocery store. Just like anything else, you need to understand what it is that your company is trying to do, and also where your industry is going. So I think esports it's probably a bit more challenging to get into at more of the junior levels unless you're going into a specific function. So for example, something like social media or content, but certainly on the team ops side, it's something where I would recommend having experience in another industry or profession before this.
That is pretty interesting. I can imagine that with your experience in both outside of esports and in esports, you kind of can be like a key communication link between people with specific esports experience and individuals that are higher up that possibly own these companies or own the teams who may not have as much traditional esports background knowledge.
Yeah, and not even just owners and senior leaders, but I think even just the general public and people that are perhaps interested in esports but aren't sure where to start with the industry. Like I said, we were all new to esports once. When I first got into esports back in 2013, I started out managing an all-female Call of Duty team and then later moved into casting for a year and a half. And in my case, I took a bit of a non-traditional approach. I did the digital equivalent of cold calling, and I just DM'd this team because I had seen them on a broadcast and I was really interested in learning. But that's also, it's very risky to put yourself out there, and the majority of people wouldn't be comfortable doing that. So, knowing people who are in the space and being able to network and make those connections with people who are happy to share. I think most people in esports are pretty happy to share about our industry, because we're one of the few industries that is still functioning for the most part as we would have before COVID happened. Obviously, a lot of companies have made some adjustments to our team sizes, where our business is focused. So right now, focused more online, moving ahead to 2021 planning, less focus on in-person events. But again, just like any other industry, you want to have advisors and people that you can trust to give you the right insight and feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, they kind of leads into our next question, because I think it's cool. Just sort of like, how did you actually get your start? You said you cold called, hit them with the classic slide in their DMs and see how it's going, the LinkedIn message, whatnot. in 2013. I mean, that's obviously 7 years ago. So like, how did sort of like that whole transition come to be? And then what was it like really to like start off on, I mean, to know how to put at the ground floor really of the industry we see today and to see the growth over the past 7 years?
Yeah, so I have an interesting perspective on things because I actually left in terms of being full time within esports for a bit and have more recently come back full time.
Yeah.
So most people that I worked with back in 2013, 2014 are either still involved in esports to this day or they're not.
Yeah.
It's definitely a space where you're either all in for a long time or
Yeah.
you phase out and you still keep an eye on things, but you don't really make the transition back in. So for me, I guess back in 2013, Call of Duty was very grassroots. Most events were run by MLG, UMG. You had like, I think NJ Halo ran some events. It was very community based and there wasn't really a lot of structure to it. You know, you did get your pro points if you played at MLG events, but those necessarily didn't have tie-in with the UMG events. And then you were playing a lot of GB online tournaments. So you would have like your 1Ks or 2Ks just to try and move up the ladder and get a better placing through that open bracket, because that was before we had a pro bracket and everyone was just making that open bracket grind all weekend.
All the time.
Yeah. So back then it was much more Wild West, I'll call it. And and then in 2015, so shortly after I left esports and casting, that was around the time that Activision went all in. So this was with Advanced Warfare, and they were very committed to building the Call of Duty World League, providing more of that structure, tournament prize winnings, and really trying to make it a pro career and a viable professional option for players, because there were still a lot of players that were playing while they were going to school or while they were working full time. And that was really when you started to see more players really committing to esports full time. Even on the business side too, there were still a lot of people that were doing esports as that side hustle, and it wasn't their primary focus. Over the next few years, it was really interesting to observe it from the sidelines, and then later on from the publisher side, seeing how the products that my studio were working on integrated back into this community that I loved. I was just on a podcast with Jess Brohard last week, who was one of the previous CWL on Camera Talents, and we were talking about that significant growth in the last few years. And that working at Activision was really I'll call it my bucket list opportunity. You know, being featured in your favorite game series and being able to say to my parents, hey, remember this thing that I did that we didn't really think was a career. You know, I took a more traditional career approach to it and still got to fulfill that dream of mine. So that was really neat to kind of have that comeuppance or that circle of life moment where everything really fell into place.
Well, I mean,
and
also,
then,
like, because I was gonna say, like, talking about coming full circle, like, I'm sure the accreditation was also cool, but like now you manage an entire professional league based out of Toronto. I mean, that's got to be a really cool thing too, right? Like, to sort of go from again working at Activision, and then now leading the one and only Canadian franchise. It's
a very daunting task. Very exciting at the same time. So when I say daunting, not scary, just daunting meaning. Challenge, the way that I see challenge is it's not meant to be scary. Like, challenge just means opportunity. And yes, there's an opportunity for failure, but that's also an opportunity for learning and for growth. And being able to step back into a community where I honestly didn't think I would come back full time has been a very, very exciting challenge for me with my own personal and professional development. You know, working in a startup while also partnering with major brands from around the world, partnering with a global league, dealing with travel and immigration. It was just this really cool, again, like that circle of life where all of these different things I had worked on in my previous roles kind of came together in that perfect opportunity that you really only see maybe once or twice in your career if you're lucky.
No, it's really cool. I think it's really exciting. And obviously, like, I'm sure there's some great quote out there about like, like you can only grow if you step outside of your comfort zone. I know somebody has it. If we can like insert it, I just
I
off
say
the
that
top of
all
my
the
head.
time. I have that
Yeah.
written on the back of my hand.
Yeah, it's
And
mean,
then, of course, the Wayne Gretzky quote: "You missed 99. You missed 100% of the shots you don't take."
yeah, that one I do know. I do know
Yeah.
that one, but I'm sure there's a philosophical one in there somewhere.
We got a big hockey fan over here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, traditional
No, we're
sports
just
and
being very Canadian.
yeah, exactly. Like you can tell that you lead the Toronto Ultra there, which is like I think it's just a really cool like I've always been a pretty big fan of the whole franchising side of things, and I think it was fun that Call of Duty hopped on it. And it's nice that we have that overlap between Overwatch and CDL. I mean, I know it got me into the CDL personally,
It did. It got me into it as well.
so like that's really exciting. And I guess it's really cool background. We can kind of talk now more about sort of the more like general manager side of things in terms of like how do you actually create a team, which like sort of brings in my first my first question. And it's one of the more interesting ones, I think, from like a general manager perspective, because I think a lot of the challenges when, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the challenges when starting the CDL sort of must have been this balance between like not only are you trying to win games, which are obviously really important, but for a league that has to be so sustainable based around, like viewership and merchandise sales and all this sort of things like you see with traditional sports, you also need to build a brand on top of that. So from the general manager's perspective, I just want to hear some of the perspectives of like, how do you manage that, like trying to win games as well as build your brand? And when you went into the creation of this roster, because I know you knew the brand before you picked the players, did that play any role in sort of the players that you went after? Like I always look at like Methods as a perfect example as not only a really really skilled player, but I think he really does embody sort of like your guys' brand as the Ultra, if you will. So how did that whole process go about?
Yeah, so we had a very compressed off season.
Yeah.
Just to give you a sense of the timelines, I started in this job my third week of July. This was the week after CWL Miami. So we had the playoffs were in Miami, and then I think it was 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, champs happened in LA. So it was a very short time, and then 1 week after that was when not full free agency started, but you could start signing players who were already affiliated with your own franchise. So there were some teams in the league.
Splice would be right. That's what you're trying to say.
Exactly.
Like, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So Overactive Media, who is our parent company, they owned the Splice brand. They also own the Mad Lions brand, and then our two Toronto franchises.
Yep.
So we had a very short time to consider our existing Splice roster, and then also figuring out, it becomes that almost that Game of Thrones or that chess setting where you're trying to figure out which team is going to keep which player. Are they going to sign them right away? Because there is a very large timing element to all of the roster decisions. You don't want to, if you sign a player too early, you can potentially spook the market a bit. But on the flip side, if you sign a player too early, then it makes other players think, oh, well, maybe I need to get signed really quickly because otherwise all of these starting spots are going to be taken up very fast. On the flip side of that, if you wait too long, then you also get spooked for, are there other things happening that I'm not aware about? And it's more that the fear of the unknown. And we kind of saw that during the off season where a lot of fans were definitely pressuring us when we didn't announce anyone in the first couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And I remember actually my favorite response was there was a CDL Intel account that was created by one of the fans, and they were kind of sharing out all of the different trade signing rumors.
Yeah.
And I remember tweeting something like just to troll and be annoying on my timeline. And they replied, they replied with a gif of a guy like poking like a rock or something on the ground with a stick, and he's like, "Come on, do something."
Yeah, like just sign. Yeah, let us know.
Exactly. Like fans, partners, other teams, everyone just wanted something, but no one wanted to be the first to do it. And so then you saw a couple of early player signings come in. I think London was the first team to announce. I think they announced the Twins, if I'm not mistaken. And then from there was a little bit of silence, and then you started to see all these signings and announcements, and it just became the snowball effect, where once you had like once the snowball had started rolling down the hill, it just grew and grew and grew. And then before you knew it in the span of, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, the teams were all built. It was a very quick turnaround time. Um, in our case, we had a few more signings than some of the other teams during that time. So
Yeah.
I like to think we were a bit more efficient on that front. But we finished all of our roster signings by beginning of October. And I think our first signing and announcement was mid-September. So it was a very quick turnaround time because for us, we also had our brand launch event here in Toronto towards the end of October, the day before Modern Warfare launched. So we needed to make sure that all of our players were ready to come into Toronto for the event. A couple of our players had family or loved ones that came with them, and then just the logistics of making sure that they had a great start to their experience with the franchise.
Yeah, so that's really cool, and I mean, obviously, I have a couple questions about the whole. As you guys do, I think, have the largest, or at least one of the largest Call of Duty rosters in the entire league. But just sort of like the whole window, because it was similar. We talked to Jay about it. And I always find like the free agency period really interesting. Were there any I don't know how much information you can give, but were there any players or deals that you were really close on getting that just fell through last second, or anything that you kind of wish you had done differently now knowing what it's like, / anything you might take moving forward into the free agency of 2021?
I think every team has at least one of those situations where you have a deal lined up, right? And not even at the 11th hour, like 11:59, 59.
Yeah.
Just as you can see it ticking over, that's when it falls through, or another team signs that player, or that player has a change of heart, wants to wait a bit longer. Coming from the recruiting world, it's something I've certainly seen a lot where it's scary to take on a new career opportunity, join a new company, move into a new role. And it's really no different with players, right? These are young players coming from all over the world. This has been, for most of them, their livelihood and their dream for years. And you're scared to make the wrong decision.
Yeah.
So definitely had those situations where, looking back, hindsight is always 2020.
Exactly.
And there are things where we definitely would have done things differently. And there are also situations where we feel like we pivoted very quickly and we were able to adapt.
Yeah.
I think for us, the biggest learning was probably the planning piece. So going into this next off season, hopefully we'll have some more time to be more thoughtful and plan it out.
Yeah.
Like for us, just like most of the other franchises, we've already started our 2021 planning and giving ourselves that time and space to be thoughtful about what does 2021 look like. Not an easy question to ask when I don't even know what the next 3 to 6 months look like, given the current global situation. But that's probably the biggest learning is having your game plan and knowing when to stick to that game plan and knowing when to pivot from it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's pretty interesting. And I just wanted to come back to the roster, just in terms of its size and how that plays out. How has been having one of the largest rosters in CDL affected the players' mentalities? Because I know that for the Defiant, they had a massive roster, and it ended up not being too favorable for them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're kind of broken down to more of a skeleton roster.
Mm-hmm.
But how is that kind of fanned out on the CDL side? Do you think that having a big roster and having some people play on the bench kind of fuels the desire to get better?
So I think earlier in the season, it was really helpful when we were traveling a lot, because it gave us more options to do roster adjustments if we had players who were experiencing burnout from that level of travel.
Yeah.
We've had our schedule change and format change a couple of times during the season. So at the beginning, during our off-season planning, we were working under the structure of single matches, just like we're seeing in Owl. And then during the Christmas break, that's when the league pivoted to that tournament setting. So that 8-team double elim weekend, fewer trips. Our schedule got a bit rougher, to say the least. So we played in the first 3 events back to back to back.
Yeah.
So we had 3 trips in 4 weeks, one of which was a trip to London. So you're throwing in international. I mean, I guess technically as a Canadian team, all of our travel is international.
Yeah, exactly.
But really international travel.
Yeah.
So that was a struggle for us the first few weeks, because by the time we came back from Christmas break, we had 2.5 weeks or so to really get settled in with the team before we went to Minnesota, and then boom, another trip, and then boom, another trip. Then we had a few weeks off, which was really helpful. But that was around the time that COVID happened. So then we were pivoting to working from home.
A few weeks turned into a few months, and then
yeah. So it's we've definitely had a challenging season so far. I think our 10-person roster has still benefited us overall.
Yeah.
Just the fact that, I was talking about this with Marky B, our coach, the other day, that we have the flexibility to practice certain strategies in-house that other teams don't have the option to. Maybe if you're a team with with a challengers or affiliated academy team, then you can. But for the majority of teams, they don't have that same flexibility. It's something that you see a lot in League of Legends, for example. League of Legends, they'll often utilize their academy team as a way to work on specific champion picks, or if there's a particular way that they want to play certain situations. It's definitely benefited us in some areas, but it does bring its own set of challenges, right? It does require more hands-on time with the different players, making sure that we are giving all of our players opportunities for marketing and partnerships, for content, and then also figuring out what the best iteration of the team looks like. There's something to be said for the intangible of team chemistry and how the group fits together. But it's the first season, and I think for us, we approach it as this, the way that CDL, even though CDL is based off of OWL, the COD community does have a much larger history than OWL did, or than Overwatch did coming into OWL. And so we thought, you know what, it's our first season, let's try something completely different. Pretty much everything else about our brand and our franchise are very different, right? Our brand voice is very different. We're the only Canadian team. We're a very new company in esport and sports and entertainment in general. So, if you're not, like I said earlier, if you're not going to take advantage of the opportunities that come with challenge, then are you really maximizing on the potential benefit or return?
Yeah. It's because I just thought it was really interesting that, again, when we spoke to Jay, it was sort of that, they tried the large roster, it didn't work, and then in the same summer that they were like, okay, let's go from a 10-person roster to a 7-person roster, Toronto Ultra comes out and is like, boom, biggest roster in the CDL, let's go. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And I do think that, I think we also saw this with Define as well in the Overwatch League. It's a little bit unfortunate. It's really hard to put criticism when I feel like both teams are sort of centered around hey, in 5 months when everyone's being burnt out, we still have substitutes that we can go in there and keep fresh. We still have the ability to travel and hang out together and do strategies and stuff like that. And then now with the whole COVID thing, it you know what I mean? It makes those intangibles slightly less valuable, which is just an unfortunate thing that absolutely nobody could have seen coming. But bringing into the whole deciding on who plays and who doesn't, I think that's one of the more interesting parts of having a larger roster is how do you, and I know this might be more on, maybe this is just my inability on the team operations side of things, but it might be more on the strategic coach's perspective on who actually hits the starting five. But I know there's been a couple controversy with the Toronto Ultra in terms of I know recently Looney was benched, and a couple people were unhappy about that, especially given his brand recognition. And there's some tweets that are going out recently. Obviously, I know Brack was a big name coming into the league, and we've still yet to see him play. You as a general manager, how do you sort of balance and make those decisions and sort of live with not the consequences, but obviously there's going to be fans of each individual players who want certain people to play and other people not to play. How do you kind of go about that?
So I used to be a caster, so I know firsthand that COD fans are very vocal about their opinions. I never have to worry about what fans think because they will tell us.
Exactly.
So it's great. It helps us make more informed business decisions where we don't necessarily have to guess or assume what fans will think because we usually have a lot of data to go off of there.
Yeah.
When it comes to roster decisions, we have a larger leadership team that we work with. So certainly Marky B being our coach, and myself being more hands-on day-to-day of the team, but also thinking about those other factors that we have with our players. So not just thinking about the best 5 players to play in that situation, but like you said, also thinking ahead longer term for the rest of the season. I think for us, we're still a bit earlier in the season, and we're in that weird middle section, we'll call it. So if you look at our schedule, we play in the Florida home series, not this weekend, but next weekend. Yeah. Then we have a month off until our last set of events, and we play in 4 of the last 5 events. So for us, this is a really critical time in our schedule where we have that flexibility to make some additional adjustments and try new things with our roster, because just like we saw at the beginning of the season, once the snowball is about to go over the hill, you can't control it. And what's going to happen is what's going to happen. So it's like, I would say it's just like any other team building exercise in business. There's no perfect scenario. Certainly COVID was not a situation that was helpful for us with our team strategy for the season.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you look at all of the people and resources that you have available, you look at the amount of time that you have, and you go, what makes the most sense for us, our players, our franchise, our business partners, and the fans. And there's no perfect scenario where everyone is happy. Everyone is going to have their feedback and their opinion, but ultimately, it's an opinion. Whether or not it's the right opinion is, it's very subjective. There are some days where fans and I might be aligned on what we're doing, and fans might be like, yeah, you guys did the right thing. Like, we love what you've done here. And there might be other days where they're like, why didn't you start this player? Or, why are you doing this kind of content? But not everyone has the insight. I'm not sure if you guys have seen the iceberg diagram before. It's probably floated around on LinkedIn and that kind of thing, where it's like the 10% that's visible above the water, and then the 90% below. Yeah. And I think that's very apparent in esports in particular, is the decisions that are made based on all of the internal information that we have that not everyone else has. At the end of the day, there's only so much you can share, and people are going to give their feedback about it, and that's okay. It's part of the job, just like anything else.
Exactly. And I just wanted to, in terms of the decision criteria for who you decide to play and not to play, because I'm primarily from an Overwatch background, as of recently, I used to play COD a lot when I was younger, but not as of recent. What are some of the things that go into evaluating an individual's on-screen or in-game skills? So, for example, like in Overwatch, we know that some players are known because they're great strategists, because they have great shot calling abilities, or they're good at bringing the team together, versus some players are known purely for their mechanical skill, for their aiming. So what are some of the things that go into that type of decision making similar for COD, or do you guys base it on other skills or attributes?
Yeah, so I guess we could break it down into macro and micro. So on a macro level, thinking about which players have the right attitude or that positive vibe that you want to bring to the team. We've probably all been on teams before where we've worked with colleagues that are a bit more challenging to work with because they see the glass as half empty instead of half full. The last thing you want in a very high stakes, high pressure environment is to have that glass half empty mentality. You definitely need to stay as positive and focused as possible. Yeah. So, certainly that teamwork aspect. Also thinking on a macro level about how well does someone understand the map? Do they understand where they need to be at what time? Do they understand how to work with their other teammates? Like, let's say in Search and Destroy, for example, right? You're in a 1v2 and you've got bombed down. You really need to work that 2-person advantage, because if you're on the one side, all it takes is one pick, and all of a sudden you're in a 1v1, and those odds are much more in your favor. So really knowing more of the innate pieces of how your teammates work. And then on a macro level, also thinking about spawn control. That's a really big one in COD, and certainly is a topic of discussion with a lot of fans and players. Understanding how spawns, placement within the map, movement within the map really come into play. And then on the micro side, individual gun skill certainly helps. I think people who put in more of those extra hours outside of practice, that's where a lot of their skills and value really show, is the fact that they're more likely to make those snap decisions because they've been in that situation over and over, right? It's practice and repetition, just like any other skill. The more you do it, the better, like the more information you have to understand what the best decision is to make in that situation. Not always going to be perfect, but we really need to get your hours in. So I would say, like, on the micro level, really even things like knowing where nade spots are, knowing where, like, if you should be positioned on, like, if you should be positioned on like scaffold versus ground versus like pushing that lane. So there's a few different factors that go into the technical side of things. But like we talked about, there's also the intangibles that we can't forget.
Exactly.
And I think this is it's a really, you mentioned this slightly earlier too, because I do think it's a really important time for the Toronto Ultra, because not only, like you said, you hit this 1 month break and then 4 out of 5, but also like the bracket this week in relation to some of the previous brackets that you guys were sort of in is like more, I think, I mean, knock on wood, more in favor in relation to like, oh, we got Chicago Huntsmen, right off the bat, and then we got to play the Dallas Empire the next week, and it's, so like how big of a turning point do you really think this is for the franchise? And then is there anything else? I should just ask that question first. Like, how big of a turning point do you think this is for your season, and maybe any like predictions or like teasers you can give for the upcoming event for the Ultra?
Yeah. So the next, sorry, I have to look at my calendar because I'm one of those people where the days are starting to blur together.
Yeah, don't worry. I hit that a few weeks ago.
The next 4 to 6 weeks are really the crucial point of our season. So certainly up until now, like I said, we had a few weeks off after we last played in the Atlanta event, where we had more of that time to look at our current roster iteration and really pause, breathe, do a little bit of that reflection before moving ahead. The next few weeks for us are really about head down, grind time. Let's evaluate. The great thing is we have the Florida event in a week and a half, so it gives us kind of an early evaluation point, like you said, where we can do an assessment and figure out if this is, if our current strategies, our current starting lineup for specific maps or game modes is our best iteration. And then it also gives us a springboard going into the few weeks before the Minnesota event. So definitely, you kind of touched on already. This is really the turning point, or the make or break, we'll call it, because after that, the season quickly ends after that. I was just thinking about this the other day, that I can't believe we're already 4 months into the season and that it's May.
I know.
I don't even know where the time went, to be honest. When I
either.
Especially given the whole situation, right? I feel like from like March to May just like snapped by, right? Like you said, the days just blur together. Like I remember I was like, oh, remember we like did this yesterday, and I like looked at my time, and it was 8 days ago. Like I swear to God, I legitimately thought it was yesterday, and it had been 8 days, and I was like my heart started beating. I was like, what do you mean that was 8 days ago? Like I just like had like a small anxiety attack, but so it's crazy like that. I think that this is it kind of goes on a touch with, and again, I don't know how much you can share, but there's a recent flurry of, from your favorite account, CDL Intel, that talked about some potential trade proposals that will have been circling around the CDL. One, is that anything that Toronto Ultra is entertaining / might potentially entertaining, but then 2, how challenging is that given the current COVID situation? Like obviously as a general manager, one way to improve your teams would be to go out there and make a trade or make a signing, right? But with the travel restrictions and all that stuff going on, like how much does that really handcuff you guys?
So I think the COVID situation does benefit us in some ways. I know that earlier we talked about, well, we don't have as much of that burnout from people not traveling. However, there is a lot to be said for the burnout and stress on our mental health with being home every day. We've all seen the jokes about, oh, well, I'm an introverted gamer, so being home every day isn't really that much different than my normal life.
Yeah.
But it really is.
It really
Even
is.
the idea of not being able to go to the grocery store without wearing gloves and a face mask, or not being able to go to your local Starbucks and sit down to have your drink, or being able to go to like a local bar with your friends on a Friday night. I think it's just the fact that those options are no longer on the table. Even if you wouldn't have taken those options before, that's really what's hitting a lot of people. I'm certainly feeling that myself, and a lot of people that I've chatted with are also feeling that. So for us, I think COVID has made roster evaluations challenging. But I think in our case, the fact that we have a deeper bench, and that if we are having performance issues, we don't have to look externally for those solutions, and that we can look internally first for some really viable options, because we have been developing our roster, and that it's not we just signed 10 players, but the fact that we have 10 players that are all getting practice time in, those things are really going to pay off for us later on, if some of this quarantine continues. I know that in the US it's a little bit different, because in the US I think some of the states are already relaxing their restrictions. I can't really comment on that too much more, because I'm not sure exactly which states or what relaxing them looks like. Personally, I'm a little surprised by that, considering we just started moving into quarantine and working from home only a few weeks ago, even though it feels like it's been much longer. But certainly here in Ontario, right, we're going to continue to see those restrictions, and in our case, it just means that we have to make sure that our full roster are still on board and on the same page going into the last stretch.
No, that makes sense. And again, that is the benefit. So I think it's cool that you guys are going to look internally first before trying to potentially make some trades. Although obviously, like you said, after the next couple months, we'll see what happens. But I totally agree. I thought it was going to be a breeze sitting at home all the time. But you're right. I went out to there's a Pokemon Go event, and I walked around and actually caught some Pokemon. But I was like, why am I so juiced right now? It's just because I haven't had sun in the past 4 or 5 days and walking around. I was amped the entire time. I just forgot how much I missed looking at trees and the sun. But so I think that covers a lot again with the Toronto Ultra and stuff like that, because like I said, there's only I do think that the event coming up is going to be very telling. I think it's a very exciting time, and I'm really curious to see sort of the roster you put forward and where it goes from there. The one thing I sort of want to ask about before we finish this off is just because it really did make headlines last night, and obviously coming from the Overwatch community, we kind of can't not notice it, and that was the former MVP Sinatra from last year. And again, one of the faces of Overwatch and the Overwatch League, playing for one of the most popular teams, just won a gold medal for the U.S. at the World Cup, has recently retired and went to Valorant. Coming from the Call of Duty perspective, and obviously Valorant is sort of on everyone's talking points, is it concerning at all? Do you see other pros maybe following in his footsteps? And how do you think Call of Duty is going to do with a sort of juggernaut as Valorant coming out so shortly?
Call of Duty is an interesting community because we don't have as much overlap with some of the other esports communities. So for example, with Overwatch, we've had a few notable players that have moved from League of Legends over to Overwatch. You had players from TF2 coming into Overwatch. And then now you're starting to see that transition in those larger announcements of players either retiring from CSGO or from Overwatch to wait until Valorant comes out as a full game, with Riot figuring out what that esports ecosystem looks like. For COD, we haven't really seen too much of that. There were some players that had access to Valorant. We do have a fair number of COD players that are quite good at CSGO. But I think a lot of COD players are still focused on really controller and COD, and I think the fact that it's mid-season is a fairly large factor for us, given how much change we've seen in our community this year. Too much change can be a bad thing, and given how much we've already gone through, it seems like a lot of players just kind of want to hold and wait to feel it out. From my personal experience, and I have a lot of friends who've worked in some of the other titles, and then also with the fact that our company has teams and staff in all of the major esports titles and leagues, it does sound like Riot has a really well developed esports team on the business side of things. And it's very interesting seeing them take more of a laissez-faire approach and seeing what the community wants, right? Leaving the discussion open instead of setting it as this is what it's going to be. It reminds me a lot of early stage COD in a lot of ways, because early stage COD, like I said earlier, when I first got into COD, was much more grassroots, community driven. And then once Activision Blizzard saw that there was an appetite for COD esports as a full-time career, then they stepped in and said, you know what, we're all in on this. And that's where you really saw that exponential growth, and really the jump from that grassroots feel to, you have your big partners coming in, you have like champs with your bigger prize pools every year, you're seeing team skins come out in game. I think on the COD side, we probably won't see as much of that transition right away. Maybe once there are more events announced for Valorant. But right now, it's honestly just such a crazy time for everyone that I don't think too many people have really thought about it.
That makes sense. And one last question, just for fun. When are you guys going to come out with purple hoodie merchandise?
I've been waiting for so long. Thank you. Like I
want a purple hoodie so bad. This is Ultra on it.
I was saving my, because I bought a Defiant one. I was going to buy an Ultra one, but I was like, the color scheme is really cool. And I was like, where's the purple hoodies with the white Ultra and the little squirrel? And I was like, someone's got to have thought of that. So please, Dominique, help us out.
When it comes to merch and our brand, like, I have to, like, anytime I do a podcast or some sort of PR community event, like, I always want to give a huge shout out to our business teams at Overactive Media, because they put in so much work to make this franchise happen. And it was really great to come over from the business side of things, outside of esports. And it was a genuine concern of mine that maybe I was coming back into esports and it wasn't as ready and developed as I thought it was. But the OEM teams have been fantastic to work with. Our head of marketing used to work for Google and really, like, put in so much time and energy and research to figure out what brand would not only resonate with fans, but also with our partners and with potential players we might sign. Earlier, we talked a little bit about roster building and what that looks like. And our business teams are a really important voice with that roster building process. Like, these are players that are going to represent our brand in all aspects. And so it is important to have players who want to represent that brand, but also resonate with that brand, right? It's a lot easier to represent something when it really aligns with who you are as a person and your own values and what you have when the cameras are off and the doors are closed and you're by yourself or with the people that you trust the most. So really having, like, I think it's very refreshing to work with such an awesome group of folks that are genuinely dedicated to launching the brand, but also thinking about the long-term trajectory and growth of it. And merch has definitely been an important part of that. I mean, especially earlier in the fall, right? We had our Peace Collective line. Being able to work with such an awesome local partner like Peace Collective. Our Ultra Bomber jackets, which were like super exclusive pieces that not a lot of people could get. Those made huge waves early on going into the season. Also, those jackets really came in handy when we had to go to Minnesota for our first event, because I'm from the West Coast. I'm from Vancouver originally. And I thought that I was like, you know what? Toronto is fine. I can handle Toronto. Where I went to school was similar. And then I went to Minnesota, and the Minnesota folks are very patient, brave people to operate in that kind of weather and climate for as long as they do. Like they were saying, sometimes it snows in May. I'm trying to imagine right now what it would be like with snow in May, because right now it's pretty sunny outside.
No, I was gonna say, don't give them credit though, because we are still the North. Dominique, we are the North. Don't give them credit. But yeah, no, I just remember when the collections came on. There's some really cool merch. Like actually, we like the merchandise for the Call of Duty League. But I was just like, eventually someone's gonna come out with the color scheme, the purple hoodie with the white Ultron. I was like, I'm just gonna wait for that. So but no,
you can't come out with all of the great ideas right away, right?
Exactly.
You gotta stagger it, right? We had our big initial brand launch. We worked with we partnered with Peace Collective. We did some awesome things there, and then you continue to evolve it. So our awesome business partners have absolutely been all over that. Especially right now. I don't know about you guys, but I've actually found I've been doing more online shopping since we've been quarantined. Like things like Lululemon, for example, and like sweatpants, hoodies. Like even if I was on MetaThreads the other day, right? MetaThreads was doing a fairly large push with their face masks, and they were doing a lot of gaming themed ones, and they were also donating back to local hospitals.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then while you're on there getting one thing, you get the pop-ups for for other pieces. You're like, do I really need a 10th pair of sweatpants? Probably
might
not.
as well, but you need to treat yourself, right? Exactly.
You gotta fill that quarantine wardrobe. I had one pair of sweatpants, and I like fifth day in, I'm like wearing this. I'm like, I gotta get more. I gotta get more. I don't have enough.
Yeah, exactly. That was
and then you're trying to find the ones that are appropriate and comfortable to wear at home, but still suitable for like conference calls, podcasts, and interviews.
Yeah, exactly.
There's some like my college sweatpants. Probably not suitable for until after 8 p.m.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. This is the time and place.
So where can we? Can you just mention your socials again, so anybody listening, if they want to follow you, see what you're doing, can find a place to do that?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, YouTube at WI5DOM12. So Wisdom 12 with a 5 instead of an S. Think Dead Mouse.
I feel
that. We get that one. And anyway, so if there's anything else you want to say before you head out, now it's time to do it. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. It was fun chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I love the opportunity to continue to build roots with Canadian and Toronto fans in particular, and also be able to reach out to fans in other communities. So thank you to everyone who's been supporting us this season. We really appreciate it. We know it's been a tough journey, and there's been a lot of waiting, but we appreciate everyone's support, tweets, coming into Twitch streams, YouTube matches. It all means a lot, more than I can say.
Awesome.
So
thank you so much again, and for everyone watching, hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you. Bye.